The found I'm Rimma Boshernitsan, the founder and CEO of Dialogue. Welcome to 10 by 20, a series of 10 questions discussed in 20-minute dialogues with local and international leaders doing visionary work at the intersection of people, technology, and society. Welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce today's guest, Anna Murray, who's the co-founder and creative director of Patternity. And Patternity is a conscious creative organization and creative platform that works with patterns to better understand life. Welcome, Anna.
Hi. So nice. I'm good, thank you. So it's 10 o'clock in the UK, so I'm in my pajamas.
I'm in my pajamas, but I think we're both really being coordinated.
Yeah,
well, as you know, this is welcome to our 10 by 20, where I'm going to ask you 10 questions in 20 minutes, and then we're going to let you go to sleep. Sounds good. So tell me, I mean, your work is fascinating. You're fascinating. I know we've been in touch for a number of years, but finally are getting to know each other a little bit better. Tell me, what elements of how you grew up have been most influential in your work?
Ooh, well, I grew up, it's hard to know where to begin, isn't it? I grew up in Hong Kong. I spent the first 7 years at least in Hong Kong. And for me, that was a very fundamental part of shaping, I guess, my visual interest. It was such a kind of contrast of big tower buildings and man-made structures, and then this ancient sense of life and nature and water and ritual and many different ways of being all coming together. And I was really, I used to go with my mum to like temples and then go and, go to the top of a building and look down, and just this sense of perspective, I think, certainly shaped me. And then after that, I grew up in a family that was very much, our kind of home was almost like a community center. So there was always different people from very different walks of life coming who, people who were without a home, people who multi-generational friendships, and lots of kind of involvements in charities. And it was definitely, our garden was the heart of growing up. Like, we had this garden, and we used to have days where we'd celebrate the apples or learn about the creatures. And so I think that really shaped me. And has always made me very interested in people and how we can have conversations that bring lots of different people and perspectives together. So yeah, I'd say that's some things in a nutshell.
Definitely. It's just a kind of collective opportunity, right? Like we see so rarely nowadays, right? Everything is sort of segmented by us as individuals, at least in the US, that we're a very individualistic society. But I think that the beauty comes with the connection points, right? Where like we can see through lines in a way that we otherwise wouldn't, right? And bring different perspectives together. I'm curious too, like how, so it shaped it, your experience obviously definitely shaped your work, because one of the things you guys are focusing on at Patternity is really seeing the through lines, right? Like, and observing and taking the time to really distill and be and but not necessarily do, right? So I'm curious if maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the bigger questions you guys are answering, and what's been inspirational specifically for your methodology and how you look at the world.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the I guess questions around when we realize how deeply interwoven and interconnected life is, and through our work we explore that through pattern, because it's an incredible visual language that can help us to understand, or non-visual, and the dance between the visual and non-visual. But when we truly know and understand and feel and sense that everything is interwoven and interconnected, and that each thread is connected to every other thread of life, how does that change the way that we live, and the way that we care, and the way that we tend, and the way that we honor nature, other communities, other ways of being, and find all different ways of learning and listening, and really caring for this planet that we all share. And so that sense of kind of consciousness and creativity, how do we want to show up, how do we want to create, what ripples do we want to create in this lifetime that we have, that is precious.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And learning from patterns in nature to kind of help us to find these through ways and these pathways.
And I think looking at the work, like looking at nature, looking at probably some of the challenges that your clients are presenting you with, really takes uh, moments of stillness, I would say,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
To observe, to create, to really see, to connect. I know
Yeah.
in our work, we're almost like weaving the invisible in some ways, in similar ways that you are, but not through the lens of pattern necessarily, not in that
Mhm,
same exact way. And I know one of the things that I find challenging sometimes is to really separate from the thing that we're trying to address and look
mm,
at the bigger ecosystem and how does everything connect so that we can come
mhm,
back and look at it with through a very specific lens.
mm,
And for me as a leader, for me as a person that's doing this work similar to you, it takes a lot of energy to be able to to separate, right, and to create that white space. So I'm
yeah.
curious for you, when do you feel most creative and most innovative in terms of how like what when you're thinking and working through some of these interesting kind of challenges that your clients are posing to you?
Yeah, well, it is often in the non-doing. So it is often
Mm,
in the listening, in the being out in nature and sitting by a river and just allowing myself, my thoughts, my feelings, my creativity to actually come through rather than forcing it into this
mm,
rigid spreadsheet world that we so often live in. Emails, it's is allowing when I allow myself to fully be in my body, be in my heart, feel my heart alive rather than always in my head. And life is about the two or many other parts of ourselves interrelating in conversation. But
mhm,
yeah, for me, feeling really creative is when I'm generally stiller. I work cyclically. Grace, my co-founder at Patternity, we both, as women, work with our monthly cycles. We work with lunar cycles. We work with seasonal cycles. So really, and even the cycle of a day, we're different creatively at different times. And so, how can we start to attune to that natural frequency, that natural resonance, that natural creative rhythm? That so often in our man-made world we're separate too, but yet we're still trying to create, and so giving ourselves rest and space and listening time to ourselves, to our bodies, to the wider world is
mhm,
super powerful. And I think what we need more than ever maybe now.
mhm.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like I love that what you said that it's in the undoing or the not doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the answers lie and like the opportunities to see differently kind of arises. I know that
Yeah.
I just came out from from a mini holiday, and truly some of the things that came to my mind was really during the times that I was staring at the sea. In thinking about that too, I think there's something that you mentioned around when you were growing up connecting with people and being part of community and really sitting with community. I'm
Mm.
curious, as you think about human connection and sort of the evolution of how we've been connecting, especially now that we've lived through a pandemic and who knows
Mm.
when it might end.
Mm.
Um, how would you say like human connection is actually shaping the work that you're doing now?
Mm. That, I mean, it's such a good question. I think, how does human connection shape what we're doing now? Well, I mean, all our projects really, they come through our friendships, our relationships, our connections, our community, um that it's very much, I see it like this mycelial network, and kind of finding ways to connect these different nodes of creativity and help create more conversations, and they catalyze new creative ideas. And there's I'm working on, I'll maybe talk about it a bit later in more depth, but the working with indigenous communities in Brazil on a project called Choose Earth, which has been far and away the most inspiring project I've ever worked on. And I've come to learn that in community, often when people greet each other, they say, how are your relations, how are your relationships? Because
Mhm.
everything is built on relationship. And that, of course, that's human to animate intelligence, to speaking with the elements, it's, or a tree or a river or the sea, it's all of these things, isn't it, beyond the human. But I mean, my human relationships, as humans, we're the bridges for this you know intangible creativity. It kind of we can communicate in ways that we can communicate and try and make change or repattern a lot of the patterning that we've created, and become more conscious and change makers within that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I suppose that's how it feels to me. and
Yeah.
community is everything. So
Yeah.
yeah.
No, it does answer my question, because I think one of the things that has been coming up for me in my conversations with people in general is that the patterns of our connection and the way that we've been engaging and not engaging is really telling about what, not only what we value, but what we prioritize and what we kind of want to invest in for our future selves. And so I think now finally there's a level of consciousness that's growing around, our environmental kind of not even safety, but our environmental relationships, our relationships to indigenous communities, our relationships to each other as a result of those relationships to communities, and our like individual like heritage. I think there's a real curiosity around what is it like, what does it mean for me to be an immigrant, for others to be 100% like, born and bred Americans, for others to be, from different countries, and also what does it mean for us to sort of suffer together and go through trauma together. And I think that's one of the things that I've been really pondering over this year is it feels like such a collective experience. And also at the same time, the trauma levels are so different depending on what communities you're part of, and how you engage with the variety of communities that you have access to. So it's endlessly fascinating. I was just even thinking, like, how cool would it be to have some sort of, nonprofit anthropological organization that studies connection and in humans on a continuous basis. I'm sure there's something that exists like this, but I was just thinking, like, how different was it in 1960 to now, to 20 years post COVID, and what's going to really change, especially as the environment changes, right, and where we live changes as a result of that, and what the resources that we have access to and whatnot might shift as well. Because I think as we're probably, you're probably seeing this too, is like we're probably changing as a species, and evolving into a different set. I don't know what that is, right? It probably take hundreds of years, but it does feel like there's a moment of impact at the moment that we're living through.
Yeah, certainly it feels like we're kind of in a bit of an amorphous kind of chrysalis moment, aren't we, of how do we want to evolve? How do we either survive or thrive, or not be around anymore? And certainly, kind of to talk a little bit to the work I have been doing with Indigenous communities, they really hold the intelligence that we need to survive. Yet, continually, even working with these communities, one has to kind of keep catching how often we in the West co-opt other knowledge, creativity, and create that. We kind of filter it back into our Western lens, and then we commodify it. And actually is the funds, is the support, is the resources going back directly to the Indigenous people who actually hold the answers to how we actually evolve as a species, because they've been gardening the earth literally for so many years, and yet we're looking to kind of climate science and science for answers that they actually hold, yet they're not being honored, and they're actually outright being wiped out. So we're living through this radical moment, and it feels so precarious, yet also quite exciting to be part of this potential shift that we need to see. And I think many of us who are the sensitive kind of, and I mean sensitive in a positive, it's taken me years to realize that, but sensitive to the needs that are arising so strongly, and the pain and the suffering that needs beauty and creative responses. It's a paradigm shift. There's no two ways about it. And are we acknowledging source in the work that we do?
Totally. Yeah. Well, it brings me to another question I had for you, which is around the impact of your guys' work at Patternity. Can you share a little bit about some of the things that have come out of it? And it sounds endlessly fascinating, right? Like, who gets to go and work with Indigenous communities in this way, but generally speaking, like, what have you seen sort of come out of that work, and what's been inspiring you as a result?
Oh, what's been coming out of it? Do you mean almost for me personally, for the clients, for anything almost?
Both. Yeah, both.
I mean, I've certainly seen, we started in 2009, and even visually, so, I often talk about paternity as like, it's almost like this journey. So it's like, firstly, and it's hard to describe what paternity is sometimes, we have a consultancy, but we also have a platform. We work on creative projects and collaborations. We also make some products. Like, it's like this kind of quite anomalous entity which in itself is kind of the fun part, but also the challenge when you try and explain what we do. But I suppose in my heart, it's this journey of understanding and of really unfolding into consciousness through creativity and pattern as this lens. But firstly, seeing and noticing, oh my gosh, like there's pattern, there's beauty, there's texture, there's like vibrancy and inspiration everywhere. So firstly, it's just seeing. And we started pre-Instagram. And so we're, that's like, we've just seen this, this huge explosion of people appreciating, for good or for bad, Instagram, a whole nother conversation. But even just that sensitivity to the visual and the aesthetic is extraordinary, and not necessarily it wasn't there before, but certainly hasn't had that amplification that we're seeing now. And then secondly, it's starting to actually understand, okay, right, I'm seeing pattern, I'm noticing it, I'm attuning to it. And then it's like, I'm kind of keen to kind of dig deeper and understand how this relates maybe to my creativity, to nature, and start this like next journey of like understanding nature and really understanding like, God, I'm absolutely interconnected with nature. There's the same patterns in me, in the crown of my baby's head, as there is in a galaxy, or my DNA cell, or a whirlpool in the water. Everything is connected. And so that's like another part. And then you start to kind of dig deeper into that, and you think, gosh, these cycles and patterns are even bigger, and they're cosmic, and there's cycles of expansion and contraction, and how does that shape the way I live my day-to-day life? And we've seen so much, all these steps that we're seeing, like much more deeper interest, and our collaborators are kind of expanding all this creativity in that sense. And then I think, for me, the final step, who knows what might come next, but is this coming back to source vibration of indigenous intelligence, and how can we be the best allies that we're here to be, and what is the true purpose of creativity? And I think a lot of people, for me, my activation to try and dig into like, why am I here? What is creativity? Was working in advertising and being really, 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 really unhappy, and feeling, to be honest, like kind of dead inside, and just like, and that's not to say everyone is, and that was my own experience, but it was just debilitating. And I just felt like I was contributing to a pattern of our culture that is so sick and unsustainable. And I was working on fast fashion, I was working on big corporate jobs, and I just kept on having this thought, like, what is creativity? Or this isn't what creativity is about. And actually, when we start to see people creatively activated, which I think for me is the real node of what paternity is about, which is really to activate people's consciousness and creativity, we can see a radical shift. So I suppose, and I feel like that's happening, and I'm not saying paternity is responsible for that. We're one node in that change, but we hold a certain kind of quality of holding space with authenticity and trueness to good intention, that I feel like it's actually, it has had some really amazing positive ripples. I literally wouldn't be able to say like what they were, but I think it's a feeling that things are shifting, and that's exciting to feel like a part of that. And working with some amazing people and individuals along the way has just been amazing. Yeah,
for sure. What are some of the patterns that you're kind of seeing trickle up to your eyes view, in a way, like just things that you're noticing in your life in the past few months that have come up for you?
I think certainly this deeper interest in the cyclical nature of life is one, whether that's creating from a place of not always in doing mode. That is like a huge pattern. Like we are cyclical beings, living in a kind of man-made, quite rigid often world. And why do we get sad? Why do we get depressed? Why do we get anxious? Well, that's maybe one of the reasons. And I think there's a yearning of questioning, we're looking inward a hell of a lot more. We're looking at our internal patterns, our thoughts, our behaviors, our habits, the way we live our day-to-day life. Is that sustainable? Is it purposeful? Is it meaningful? Where do we find meaning? Big questions, I think, that are being asked. So yeah, I feel like those are some patterns, and just this coming back to the realization that we are nature. We're not separate from nature. And for me at Patternity, I guess one of our big missions is to explore that link between the personal health and planetary health, because the two are inextricably linked and cannot be separated, and I think we've kind of have separated those, and we see a lot of kind of self-care movement, and that's amazing, but I think it also has to have a kind of purpose as well with it. So yeah, so those are some patterns. I mean, there's so many more probably, but those are the ones that come to mind straight away. The sense that we're interconnected is also, I mean, that is consciousness, that is awareness. So I see that rising, and the pandemic has actually kind of done a lot for that, because we've noticed that what we do ripples out and impacts others, and it's on an unseen, interconnected nature. So yeah,
absolutely. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Oh yeah, I've already be talking quite rapid fire, but yeah, I'll see if I'll go even faster.
Yeah. So when do you feel most connected to others? One sentence.
Oh, I think, quick, laughing and being playful, I think is my ultimate, when I'm really like, laughing and being silly, because it's serious enough.
Yeah. And so when and where are you happiest?
I think anywhere near water, ideally in it.
We're similar in that way.
Yeah.
What intersection of disciplines are you currently most fascinated by?
Oh, so many, but I'd say science, indigenous intelligence, and creativity, design and creativity, and well-being. But yeah,
very important. Very important. What is your biggest regret?
Oh, I think my biggest regret is not trusting my intuition. I think in the past, if I didn't feel, happy in some situation, I would think there was something wrong with me, rather than actually trusting that no, this is a reaction to something not being right for me, rather than turning on myself, actually listening more to myself and trusting myself.
Oof, I relate to that one. What is the one thing you wish to pass down to the next generation?
Oh, what do I wish to pass down to the next generation? That I've really tried to help bring forth a new, I don't know how to say that one. Do I wish to, like a kind of pearl of wisdom, or like actually like a kind of a thing that I've done?
But whatever's alive for you.
Yeah. That I was a part of shifting, as a part of shifting creative consciousness at a time that was really needed. Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
That's quite a big thing to say, isn't it?
It's a big thing to say, but you were doing it. You guys are doing it, right?
Yeah.
You're rippling,
creating some
you're really creating a lot of ripples,
watery ripples.
Yeah. Well, that's all I have. That's our 10 questions, 20 minutes.
That was brilliant. We stick to 20 minutes. That's amazing. That was great.
Thank you. It was awesome.